So I'm delighted to be hosting this panel about science fiction, technology, and how theatre grapples with both. We've got about 30 minutes, so I'll try to keep my own chatter to a minimum, introduce my much more interesting guests. Lauren Mooney, who co-runs the theatre company Kandinsky with director James Yeatman. Right here. The two of them co-created More Life, with Lauren leading on text and dramaturgy and James on direction. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
great, brilliant, good start. And Dr. Matt Butler, an academic neuropsychiatrist from King's College London, who works in an area that has informed the science underpinning More Life. He's a colleague of Dr. Tim Nicholson, who advised Kandinsky on the show, but sadly can't be with us today. And Matt has kindly agreed to step in last minute to be the psi to Lauren and James's phi on this panel. So maybe we can start with you, Lauren and James. This play being a creature that you brought to life in a Frankenstein-esque way. And Frankenstein itself is commonly spoken about as the first science fiction novel, and of course gets referenced a few different ways in this play. And Mary Shelley's work was informed by the scientific advancements of her day and the discussions around it. So I was wondering, what works of science fiction have inspired you as writers and directors and theatre makers generally? And if there was any science fact from the last few years that have inspired More Life in particular.
I mean, my big science fiction thing is Star Trek: The Next Generation, because my mum used to teach an evening class on a Wednesday. My dad used to bring chicken and chips home from the shop, and we'd sit and watch Star Trek: The Next Generation in the early to mid 90s. And that was my main sci-fi thing. Although my dad is a big sci-fi fan, really likes Isaac Asimov and all these kind of people. But I'm not like a massive sci-fi nut,
yeah.
and Lauren is more.
I grew up with like my dad collected the original series of Doctor Who on VHS, so I grew up with all the old Doctor Who's.
Yeah.
In fact, met my husband because I impressed him by knowing all of the Doctors in order, correcting someone on the order.
I did not know that. That is brilliant. Okay.
Which tells you everything you need to know about my marriage. I kind of grew up with the original series of that, but also with quite a lot of, I guess, like mid 20th century British sci-fi is kind of my touchstone. I like kind of Nigel Neal, I like Blake Seven, I like all of that stuff. So it's got to be like bleak, depressing, and I guess in some way either there is a kind of maybe some kind of social or political engagement that I'm looking for in sci-fi. You know what I mean? I think I'm not into hard sci-fi. You know what I mean? And I don't read a lot of sci-fi apart from like Ursula Le Guin, but I like stuff where it feels like it's telling you something about the world that we live in, which I think all the best sci-fi is doing anyway. You know,
Yeah.
but I'm less into space opera. I can't remember if you're Star Trek or Star Wars. I remember you were big.
Both.
Okay,
I
so
also
you're into all the stars. Which we
And
were.
Star Wars is space fantasy, not sci-fi.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. Exactly. That's it.
Sorry.
That's it.
I said I was a nerd. It's fine. It's so good. So the route into this play was more about, I think you said somewhere that it was an article that you'd read, so something more grounded.
You read it.
I read an article by a woman who had just written a survey of like transhumanist ideas in Silicon Valley, and she had and she was being interviewed in the newspaper and was talking about how she she talks about bodies as 8-brained meat sacks, which is quite a common Silicon Valley way of kind of talking about kind of idea that like human beings have done very well to evolve to the place where they've got to, and that like in their bodies, but like we don't need like technological development is all connected to the AI singularity and all this kind of stuff, that kind of technological development is getting to a place where we don't need the body anymore, and that we could look at the body as a complete like waste of time and something that like, and she was kind of said these very kind of bold things in the article and in her book that I then read that was like, you know, I mean, people who've given birth say that like, or carried babies say that it's this kind of amazing spiritual experience, but actually they're all lying to themselves, and this is bollocks. And like everyone knows they would be happier if they didn't have to, if babies were grown in kind of weird amniotic sacs or something like that, and that like, and that also like eating and sleeping and shitting and all this kind of stuff are just fucking waste of time, and that like it would be much better if we kind of shuffled out of the body. And as a theatre maker who feels under pressure because of bloody Netflix anyway, this felt like a real kick in the teeth, because theatre is human bodies looking at each other. And it also fed in, we had, I'm going to kind of loop Matt in here slightly, but like we had made a play a few years before with that was about functional neurological disorder, which I'm about to which I guess you can explain.
Explain what functional neurological disorder is. Exactly. Question. So
Before we embarrass ourselves,
I'm sure you won't, because you did a great learn it. So functional neurological disorder, FND, is it's a body disorder where people have difficulties with symptoms that affect parts of their nervous system. And it can be any sort of part of the nervous system. So it can be something like a weakness in one of the limbs. It can be a tremor. It could be seizures. It could be problems with vision. It can be problems with thinking, cognition, memory. So any kind of aspect of the conscious nervous system you can think of, it can be affected by FND. It can be really serious and debilitating, and actually quite poorly understood and poorly known condition. But it can be really, people could be really affected by it. But it's the crucial difference between FND and sort of other neurological disorders is that there's no identifiable kind of structural pathology within, you can't see anything on a scan in FND. There are ways that you diagnose it that are different based on the kind of way that the symptoms present, but there's no sort of structural or toxic or metabolic damage to the nervous system. So it's a kind of it's a disorder of kind of conscious access to the nervous system, and I think it's a really sort of embodied condition that brings in kind of brain and mind concepts. So I can see why it was covered in a play like it.
Because and I guess we were kind of interested in the sense of like not knowing your body and your body being a mystery to you, and your body being like the feeling of being disembodied in different ways, which I think
the relationship between the mind and the brain.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of the experience FND sufferers get is this feeling of there's nothing observably wrong with me, and therefore why is my body not working? And we really enjoyed making that show. And there was something about reading about these Silicon Valley people being like, let's get rid of the body, it'll be great, let's lose it all. And like, what does it mean to be a completely disembodied person and all that kind of stuff felt kind of the territory that we were quite interested in. So yes.
And it's interesting as well, because obviously you're saying what is the kind of science fact that inspired the show, and to some extent we were being inspired by science fact that is also science fiction. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't exist yet. The technology that the show is talking about, people are pouring right now billions of dollars into trying to make this technology exist. And so we had based it as far as possible on the kind of things that the research say may or may not be possible. You know what I mean? We spoke to neurologists and various different kind of experts in the making of the show and said, would it ever happen, that you could remove a consciousness from a body and upload it to a different substrate and all of this stuff, which is technology that people are trying to create. Very split answers on that. I mean, there's no agreement of what consciousness is even, so it seems relatively far-fetched. But the thing that was interesting about it to us wasn't just that people want this technology, want this world to exist, but also that the same people that are funding this technology are themselves huge sci-fi fans that are trying to make the things they've seen in the films they've grown up with. And now, so we're in this weird situation where science fiction has created a culture of people who are creating a future based on science fiction. And that felt to us like a kind of interesting.
So I was going to come on to talking about the particular challenges of staging sci-fi and what that's like. But as we're here, like, Matt, what would the neurological reality of taking a consciousness out of the body look like?
Yeah, I mean,
what would happen to Bridget?
I mean, obviously, I'm not going to be able to give you a definitive answer to that. I think, I think if you asked me, a colleague might say something different, and I think you said there would be split opinions, and I can definitely see why. And I think when you talk about consciousness, that does boil down to the fact that we don't really know what consciousness is.
What do you reckon? Is it real?
Yes, of course it's real because it feels real to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's what parts of consciousness can science access? And I think that this goes back to thoughts of thousands of years, but from the 90s, this idea of the splitting between the hard problem of consciousness and the soft problems of consciousness. So the soft problems of consciousness are the kind of soluble aspects of consciousness that maybe we can understand as scientists. So how do we see things? How does the visual system work? What parts of the brain are responsible for joy? What parts of the brain are responsible for memories? Can we augment pleasure? What pathways are responsible for that? But then the hard problem is how does that translate into a feeling, living, enacting being? And I don't think that science will ever be able to, in my opinion, transplant that from a human body into a computer or between bodies.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of aspects of consciousness, like the embodied nature. So again, we talk about kind of living through a body, and I don't think it makes sense to think of consciousness without that. I think it's also, consciousness is dynamic. Can you freeze consciousness in time? I don't think it makes sense to.
Yeah.
Can consciousness be extracted from something and be represented by zeros and ones? Again, I think it's not going to be possible to. I think, that being said, I think there are some really interesting developments already in science about sort of these brain-computer interfaces, which kind of show how we might be able to, Neuralink stuff. So, but again, these are, so for those of you who don't know, I don't know that well, but essentially it's technology that looks at EEG, so kind of brain waves, electrical activity, and converts them into signals that we can then read. And we can use that through computer programs to sort of read what's going on in the brain, and people can control for artificial limbs, for example, using that. So that's a really cool way that we can sort of access consciousness, because we're getting someone to consciously move their arm. But again, it's using kind of representations of consciousness. It's using the brain waves. It's not actually consciousness itself. We can scan people who've got locked-in syndrome, so severe brain damage where they can't communicate, get them to imagine playing a tennis game sometimes, and we can read the MRI signals and to get them to communicate through that way by getting them to imagine playing tennis. So wow, we're communicating with someone with consciousness, but again, it's the representations of consciousness that we're dealing with there. It's the imaging correlates. We're not actually getting closer to what consciousness is. So I think it's hubristic to think that science will be able to transplant consciousness. But that's
I agree. I would say we made the show from a perspective of also thinking that, and like obviously the show imagines that it's possible, but I would say I don't think we believe necessarily ourselves that it's possible. I think there was something about I think the whole instinct that it's possible comes from this like quite Descartesian idea that like you are yourself and your body is something else, you know what I mean? Yeah. And that felt quite disturbing to us. Like the whole concept of the technology itself felt kind of disturbing to us, and that was one of the starting points, I think.
The desire to lose the body.
Yeah. Is heuristic.
Is a mistake, isn't it? That it is that yourself is something that can be lifted out and preserved, and that would be the thing that you'd want to be preserved.
The Royal Court has a legacy of producing science fiction shows, most famously probably Carol Churchill's cloning family drama A Number, and more recently shows like Alistair McDowell's X, which was a sort of existential horror set on a space station on Pluto. And I think More Life conceptually, sits somewhere in between those plays.
He says that's not sci-fi.
No, I know.
It's set on a spaceship,
but you said it on a spaceship.
Yeah, exactly.
It's getting there. Do you think there's a particular type of sci-fi story that suits theatre as opposed to novels and films? And what are the challenges around bringing those stories to the stage?
Sci-fi is like classically a novelistic or a filmic medium, right? Isn't it? And that it often depends on a big, bold picture of the future that you can see or that can be described in a novel that you can see in your head. When the chorus all argue about what the future's going to look like, in my head I had that kind of opening sequence. I say in my head as if I wrote it. Actually, Lauren wrote it. But we kind of really think about that opening sequence of Blade Runner when there's the shot of the eye and then the city and all the fire and all this kind of stuff. And that sci-fi really, a lot of classic film sci-fi just really loves that big wide shot, and theatre just can't. And I find theatre where it tries to recreate that wide shot is awful. It's like really dreadful. I mean, in general, I find quite like theatre that tries to create realism. It's not completely my cup of tea, but really, when it's trying to create filmic realism, is a real mistake, I think. So I guess we wanted to have our cake and eat it with the chorus arguing about the future, and that is kind of it's playing into that kind of filmic sci-fi thing while acknowledging that it's not that, and also the filmic sci-fi thing is a fiction anyway. Like it's giving you a picture of something that is. Theatre might be a place where we could argue about what the future might be, because we're definitely in the present right now in a way that film is offering you
a fixed reality that's
through a world that you can never access. Anyway, that kind of that is giving you something else, and that theatre might be more discursive in that respect.
Yes.
I think like Carol Churchill's A Number is a big influence on this, isn't it? It's like that sense that there's like a body that is playing different people but look the same, and is that the person? Like, what is it that makes the person you're asking an audience to look at a body on stage,
and it's the same actor but you can forget.
Exactly.
It allows you to forget.
And that you're watching people perform, like, it's you're acknowledging the fact that, I think there's something interesting in theatre, which is that you are, on the one level, you are definitely right here, right now, and that those people in front of you are definitely them. and you also know that they're pretending, and that there's something and so therefore they aren't them, and whereas film tends to be offering you a fixed reality of like Timothy Chalamet playing Bob Dylan. Actually, that's a shit example, but someone you don't know so well playing someone you don't know. You know what I mean? With Bob Dylan, it's a different thing. So you're watching people potentially be someone else while knowing that they are themselves, and that is saying something interesting about what it is.
The suspension of disbelief is
It's inherently ethical in itself.
And I think there's also another strand of sci-fi on stage that's not what we're doing here, but that X was doing really well, and that your Cherry Orchard was doing really well, which is about a kind of like space stories are something that are really claustrophobic, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And that works quite well on stage, you know what I mean? I think what's quite hard to do on stage is really expensive wide shots of a city, you know what I mean? That you can do in Blade Runner. We just don't have the budgets.
Blade Runner is famously in the past as well now.
I know. Yeah, now it's...
That's how old everyone is in this room.
But even if you had the budget, it would be shit. Even if you had the
but I mean, there is no theatre budget that is capable of depicting what is done on film. You know what I mean? Like, it's the scale of film, and the capacity of film is just another world. But those, if you watch a film like Moon, that feels like a play. You know what I mean? Because it's so claustrophobic, it's so enclosed, and actually those kind of outer space stories have a like unity of place. You know what I mean?
Yes,
that is quite traditionally dramatic, and that can work really well on stage as well. So I think you've got to cut your cloth, and also it's a bit like, for us, I think something has to have a reason to be a play and not something else. I think we would never want to make something that just we felt like, oh, we couldn't get we weren't able to make it as a film, so we've had to do a play. You know, like we are making theatre because that's the medium that we're interested in and that we enjoy working in, and so there's some extent to which it has to be like with this. We knew it had to be about the ensemble creating the reality together and 6 bodies in a room as a refutation of the idea that we don't need to have bodies anymore. You know what I mean? That had to be the fact of the show.
And not to do theatre down, but I think sci-fi theatre can engage with the real mundanity of the future, because I think that's a thing that sort of is like the things that sort of change the world. Actually, very, very small, like often seem to be boring things.
Right, and also with something like this, you're looking at a distance of 48 years. It's not very much, you know.
No. If you're really late on your deadline, that would just be the facts rather than
Well, that's it. It's like we were talking to people about it, and we'd be like, okay, well, how different would it be, and how different would it be to look at, and actually how different were the 70s to look at? You know what I mean? It's different, but you wouldn't look at it and be like, oh my God, it's 2024. You know what I mean? If you stepped out of your time machine, you wouldn't be completely staggered, you know, but you would see some things and be like, oh, I don't like that. You know, it's a kind of interesting, it's within a human lifespan, how much really changes is a kind of interesting.
I have a fun question for you, Matt.
Yeah, go on.
As someone who has to deal with the everyday reality of science, what are the most frustrating, annoying / far-fetched tropes you see in science fiction? Like makes you scream at the telly. It's like, we'll never
I have to concede that I'm not a massive science fiction fan. So I guess in general, it's this is maybe a bit of an abstract point, but this idea that scientists are certain about things and that we know things and that we can do things to people and that actually science is a process. There's lots of uncertainties, there's lots of gaps, there's lots of differing opinions, and science is sometimes seen as a slightly malevolent force that scientists can use, but actually that's not how science works. It's more about kind of exploring unknowns and testing hypotheses, and again, there's sort of differences in opinion and things like that. So I think that seeing scientists as wielders of this malevolent, powerful, and certain tool can be a bit of an annoying trope.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's anyone who desperately has a question to throw to us. Now is the moment to do it.
I have a question about if anyone has any recommendations of any books or area or something that we can read or digest, some sort of research into the idea about like consciousness and body and separation.
In the front of the play, not to make you buy a play text, but in the front of the play text, we put some of the names of some of the writers that we'd been influenced by, and I think that's probably quite a good place to start. We really Mark O'Connell's
To Be a Machine is
good.
Is really good about the technology stuff of this.
Absolutely. My key recommendation would be a little book called The Delusions of Certainty by Siri Hustvedt, who's a sort of Norwegian American fiction writer. She writes amazing fiction, but she also wrote this kind of very long form essay about, well, it's called The Delusions of Certainty. So it's about this sort of hubristic idea of consciousness, and particularly kind of the idea of uploading consciousness to computers. And she talks a lot about the kind of reciprocity of consciousness and how the relational aspects and loads of this kind of embodied things that we've been talking about. And it's an absolutely fantastic essay. Really, something that I read when I was a bit younger, and it really kind of changed my views on things. Anything by Antonio Damasio is really good for consciousness as well. He talks a lot about kind of the embodied nature of consciousness. And a more recent one, it's a bit more theoretical, but it's really accessible, is a book called Being You by Anil Seth. He's a consciousness scientist based down in the University of Brighton. And he talks about this idea of the brain being a predictive machine. So rather than a kind of passive receiver of stimuli, kind of the brain is predicting what's going on in the body and in the environment. And in his view, that generates consciousness. I'm not sure I completely agree with that step, but I think that as an introduction to kind of brain science and thinking about consciousness through kind of theoretical neuroscience is a brilliant and accessible book. And he's a really interesting guy.
One of the most interesting things that we read about or found out about while making this show, which I just want to name, is when we met Dr. Paul and told us about neurological blind sight. Have you heard about this?
Yes,
yeah. I mean, obviously you have. That's why I asked that. Do you know about this? But the whole, we met someone who's researching into this, who. Actually, I should probably let you tell this story. As a marker of the whole thing about the damage to the...
Well, I mean, I've never seen this clinically, but from my understanding, it's where there is damage to a particular part of the occipital cortex, kind of the seeing part of the cortex, which processes images. So essentially the images are not transmitted into consciousness somehow, and I don't know how that works. But so the person retains their sight and is able to navigate through it's a different thing. Okay.
No, it's similar. So So in theory, their sight is there, but they can't.
But they can't see. So they retain their sight. They're able to get around, but they say, no, I'm blind. But they are able to navigate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're able to guess like how many fingers they're holding up, even though they don't know.
Yes.
They say, I definitely can't see.
I think there's a hand there, so I'm going to take that.
If there's a way in the future, scientifically, so agree or disagree or talk about it, that file, like Blade Runner, has memory, does that then make someone a being? Does that make them conscious?
I would say that memory isn't the only thing though, because I think I think Bridget. It feels to me that Bridget passes the test of being a functioning robot because she can remember her childhood. I mean,
the nonsense that we made up for what the hell they're looking
scientific thing that we made up. But she can remember things, so she remembers her path, and she can work the body, right? She can move around and do things.
And she feels herself.
Feels herself to be herself. But I think, so she is a being. I think Bridget is a being. Mm-hmm. And she is a kind of, but she's not what I guess that's what the play is kind of asking, isn't it? Like Harry is the person in the kind of ship of Theseus thing. Harry is the same guy. He's in the same body, however augmented by injections or whatever. But he doesn't have that memory anymore. And Bridget exposes the fact that he's as different from himself as Bridget is from herself. I guess it's that thing like you were saying, that consciousness is not a fixed line, is it? And
and it's a real thing about how much who we are is set in other people as well. I think that was one of the most moving parts of the play for me, I think, is being reminded, when you meet an old friend and someone tells you something delightful about yourself from your childhood or something, and you're like, that feels like that should be a really important part of my being. Thank you for reminding me. But it's
yes. And so I think, there's something where I think like memory is obviously really, really important, and that does make you a being. I feel like I'm on shaky ground, but like there's something where it's like just remembering things isn't
enough. Well, that's it. I think there's something about this technology that says I can, if I pay enough money to get it invented, and I'm a billionaire, I can have my brain removed and my mind extracted from my brain, like pouring wine out of a bottle, and I can therefore be uploaded into a new thing, and I can exist in a completely new way. But that is also a way of existing. Like they're not saying, and everyone will do this. They're saying, and I will do this. So it's a future where you would be alone. I think we think of people as something that is that are communally created. Do you know what I mean? There's something that's like, Bridget isn't just alienated from herself because she's not in her body. She's alienated from herself because almost everyone who knows her is dead. And so her sense of who she is and her sense of herself as a being is not just coming from, I feel like myself and therefore I am myself, but from looking at the people in your life and them saying, I remember this about you when you were a child, and this is the kind of person that you were, and this is who you are, and having like continuity of self. And something about that isolation, I guess, is something that the technology is really, really individualistic, and it's really, really about soul survival of individuals, leaving everyone else for dead. And there's something about that doesn't ring true for us, or that doesn't feel like our experience of being alive.
Whereas where we are now is a very theatrical place, and like we're together experiencing
This
the
is
same
as
things.
human as it gets.
It's human as it gets.
Enjoy it, guys.
I think we are very, maybe you take one very last question.
I love the play, it was great. I was wondering about the ending, and if it was always gonna end that way, or if maybe as you were writing Bridget, did she like surprise you? Or
I think we had talked about a few different endings. I mean, we made the show over quite a long period of time, and it evolved in our minds. But this was the ending for a long time, that she would have to be given the opportunity to turn herself off, and that we would have to see that really it would be better for the world were she to do that, and that we would have to see her understand that, and that we would still have to understand her desire to keep living. I think there's something that the thing that felt truest to us was that a lot of the second half of the show is like, is she the same person? Is she a person at all? Is she human? And there is something human that remains in her, and the piece of her that's human wants to live. And that there is something that says that the human condition is to want more life. She said the title. And that's why we're doomed. You know what I mean? It felt like it was the only ending we could think of that was depressing and hopeful at the same time, and that felt.
It links it right back to Frankenstein again.
Exactly. That's it. Exactly it. Going
It
off
says
across the
life
eyes.
is miserable, but I want more of it.
On that,
Exactly.
on that wonderful, hopeful note, thank you everyone for being here and sticking around, and thank you for this beautiful play. I think the best science fiction is, I love science fiction that creates analogies, but my favourite science fiction is the ones that ask the questions we don't even know how to deal with yet, and I think this play does that really beautifully. So thank you all for the show, and thank you all for being here today.